And we're heading back into Brisbane at the end of 6 weeks on the road in central, eastern, western and sometimes North Queensland. We've had trips back to Canberra in between and odd days in the southeast, but it's been 6 weeks on the road. I want to start by expressing my condolences to the victims of the Noosa carjacking on the Bruce Highway today. 3 people dead and 1 person seriously injured. Again, a victim apparently of youth crime. So that's very serious. I'll talk more about that in a minute. You know, I want to focus on the highlight, the people. The absolute highlight of this trip has been the people. So welcoming, so supportive, so open, and so blunt. It's just so refreshing to be out with real people out of Canberra. A very sad highlight, but probably the big item that came up, well, the second biggest item that came up was the crime in Townsville. Oh, the crime in Rocky, the crime in Maryborough, the crime in Bundaberg, out of control. But in Townsville, people are terrified, absolutely terrified. We heard 3 stories just at the time when I was talking, and it was just horrific what's going on. An elderly lady, 75 years of age, having to protect her husband who's 78 and onset of dementia, and from a machete-wielding guy who was wanting to chop him up and belted him. So, I mean, that's not Australia. But the biggest highlight of all is the sheer potential. The people wanting to restore Australia, they're passionate about it. Everyday Australians around this country want to restore our country. And it's just so heartening to hear that and to feel the passion in these people. Everyday Aussies, so passionate about our country and the potential we have, and they want to get it back. Here's a list of some of the towns we visited: Gympie, Gin, Monto, Hervey Bay, Bundaberg. I'm reading from the list because I can't remember them all. Bundaberg, Gladstone, Maryborough, Biloela, Mara, Springshaw, Blackwater, Gracemere, Rocky, Yeppoon, Serena, Moranbah, Collinsville, up in the north, Mackay, Ayr, Townsville, further north, Clermont, Emerald, Longreach, Charleville, Mitchell, and we just left Roma this morning after a presentation last night. You know, it's really very, very encouraging to get the support that we had in so many places. We had little towns, and we had Townsville, where we had 120 people at events. We had 70 people at events, 120 at Emerald total in 2 events. I want to thank people for attending. I want to thank them for being awake, by showing they're awake by attending. I want to thank them for making an effort for Australia. And I want to thank them for being together with us at the front line in an information war. And people understand that. We have been in an information war. We are in an information war. I want to thank the pubs and clubs who supported us, and including the Rockhampton Croquet Club. There's a story there because the venue key was not available when we arrived at Gracemere for the Rocky presentation and the Rocky listening session. And Aidan in our staff team, he was with me in the car, and he just went driving down to the Bowls Club, and on the way found the Croquet Club. That's a hard thing to say. And they just opened up and let us have their facilities. So thank you so much to the Rocky Croquet Club, and especially Kylie. You know, thanks to our Senate office team, Aidan and Richard and Sheena and Michelle and Liam and Hugh, thank you so much for what you've done, because this was all done with very, very little notice. It was done on the fly. Some of the venues were arranged while we were approaching the town, and it was all done with such little notice. And I want to thank especially the pubs and clubs and the Queensland Hotel Association, because you did a marvellous job. And I thank the people who came along and supported those pubs and clubs with their patronage. The support is absolutely amazing. I was moved sometimes to tears by people coming up and saying how much they appreciated what we're doing. The format for each of the events we had were, first of all, to listen. It started with a pub chat, or a pub test as we like to call it, in which I presented some topics for about 45 minutes. Then Q&A on any topic at all. People in the audience could ask me questions and I'd give them answers. And then we had another session after that, and the Q&A would last about 45 minutes, and then another session on a personal one-on-one basis for anyone who wanted to hang around, get photos, asked me personal questions that they didn't want to ask in public. And so sometimes we were there, how long? 3 hours at times, but it was fabulous. Some of the topics we covered: immigration and housing, all caused by shoddy governance; inflation, caused by shoddy governance; energy crisis, caused by shoddy governance; cost of living crisis, caused by shoddy governance; crime. Townsville is horrific, and the people are sincere and genuine, full of stories about what's going on in Townsville. Again, caused by government interfering in education, government interfering in families, destroying families' responsibility for their children. There are so many things. We'll go into that much more comprehensively in the future. But the core issue is governance that is absolutely shoddy. They don't base decisions based on data. They make up stuff on the fly to look after their vested interests and their buddies and their mates and the corporate donors, the big union bosses as donors. Every major problem in this country comes out of that building in Parliament House in Canberra. The intent is not to serve us, the people. The intent is to rule over us and to push and put in place a globalist agenda and control. So we have been ceding sovereignty in our country for over 70 years, and that's got to stop. And we've highlighted that and some of the things we're doing. We've also put out a request for people to help us so we can help the people. For example, sharing the knowledge. So many people are already awake and they know what's going on and they don't like it at all. So we need people who are awake to share their knowledge with their friends, families, co-workers, club members. We need people to share videos, my videos. There's so many comments about how our videos have been really helpful, very instructive, and to share our videos with people who've never heard of Malcolm Roberts. We need people to do their jobs, do our jobs as citizens, and that is hold MPs accountable, members of Parliament accountable, whether it's by visiting them, or telephoning them personally, telephoning their offices, getting in touch with them about their issues through letters written either in hand or signed after being typed. But we've got to hold members of Parliament accountable. The people of Australia are in charge of this country, but we have not been doing our job as citizens. We haven't been holding our supposed representatives accountable. And instead of representing us, they're trying to control us. Another responsibility is to vote. And I'll talk more about these things in the future. And hopefully support One Nation, because One Nation is alone at the moment in pushing many of these issues. We reminded people after the last 3 years that they can see how the globalists isolate, terrify, and fabricate the misperception, the misrepresentation that we are vulnerable and alone. We are not. People in the presentations saw that there are other people, many other people, who are waking up. So we need to understand that their tactic, the globalist tactic of fabricating the perception that we are alone and isolated and we need to feel vulnerable and afraid, wrong. We also highlighted the anti-human myth that drives all of the globalist agenda, and that's been driving some of the Greens programs in this country that the Labor Party and the Liberal Party are implementing. People can see that the Labor Party and the Liberal Party are two sides of the same coin. They're both pushing identical policies. The only difference between the two parties is that there are a very, very few number of members of Parliament, including senators in the Liberal Party, that stand up. There are none in the Labor Party that stand up. We talked about the UN and World Economic Forum stealing children's futures with indoctrination rather than education, with stealing our health system to control us, destroying families, stealing our food, changing our food, controlling energy, increasing energy prices and making them very unreliable, stealing property rights, a fundamental basic thing like property rights, destroying religion, stealing control of water, the voice, to steal further property rights and to steal our position in this country as equals. They want to bring in isolation and separation, the basic anti-human approach that these mongrels are pushing. It became very obvious, what we've been saying for a while, that they're hollowing out the bush and the regions. Yet there's enormous potential. There is enormous potential in the regions of this country. They're so potentially wealthy. Australia used to have the world's highest income per capita in the world. That was 120 years ago. Now we're around about 20th and sliding. But the potential remains. We've got a massive market above us in Asia, the world's biggest market. We've got marvelous resources, marvelous climate, year round. We've got wonderful people. We need to get our act together. The only thing, and people identified this, the only thing we're missing and needing is leadership. So remember that we are not alone, and the people are waking. We showed people many instances of how we're actually winning. People are surprised. So anyway, people are feeling very angry. They're feeling confused, frustrated, disappointed and stunned when we start our meetings. But they sense some hope that at least some of us in Parliament are awake. Their needs, people's needs, are leadership. Number one everywhere is leadership. Honesty, truth, trust. Parliamentarians to work for, serve the people and work for Australia, not the globalists. So I want to say how much I deeply appreciate people's support, knowledge and interactions, and the fact that Australians are fair income. There's no BS around them. It's just straight open and direct. We have a wonderful state in Queensland, a truly wonderful state, not because we won State of Origin again for the umpteenth time, but we have a wonderful state, wonderful people, poorly led. We have a wonderful nation, poorly led. Enormous potential. And it gives me goosebumps sometimes just driving through and listening to people. So I want to say thank you so much to the people of Queensland who welcomed me and were open and honest and frank. We look forward to continuing to working with you and to be of service to you. So I'll hand over to questions. I've got a brief time. We can see the city approaching and I'll have to stop pretty soon. But if you've got any questions, we'll take them now and answer them. Flat Dog. Oh, you're welcome, mate. Thank you very much for listening and for your support. Tracy is saying all voting is totally corrupt. Actually, Tracy, it's not. I introduced a bill for audits of federal elections, which have never been audited before, and for voter ID. It was originally voted down by the Labor Party, Liberal Party, National Party and the Greens. We then got approached by Ben Morton, the minister in charge of assisting the Prime Minister, the previous Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and they wanted to work with us. We did so. The Liberals reintroduced our bill with minor changes in terminology, and that bill passed through. So now we have elections. The last election was the first that's ever been audited. It wasn't perfect, but we're now fairly comfortable with the Australian Electoral Commission. We've sharpened them up over the last couple of years. They gave us a special presentation because they recognised how seriously we've taken election audits, and we're now very comfortable with the majority of aspects. We want the voter rolls audited because we think there are many dead people on the voter roll and they may be casting votes. We also want some more work around the pre-polling scrutineering. There's one other issue which escapes my mind at the moment, but the elections, we're very comfortable with the elections. We are not completely comfortable, but it's heading in the right direction, and we're very, as I said, very assured that the elections are in fact audited now, and the Australian Electoral Commission is doing its job, and it knows we're watching very, very closely. Get out and vote. People say, what's the point of voting because the elections are rigged? They're not rigged. They are not rigged. Every time someone doesn't vote, they're basically voting for the Liberal, Nationals and Labor. That's what they're doing. We need more votes for the minor parties because that's the only way we will provide an alternative to the Liberal, Labor uni party, the Liberal, Labor duopoly. So get out and vote. Icy says, Malcolm, do you think government is running the country down on purpose? I think they are. United Nations, World Economic Forum, World Health Organization puppets. I agree with you, Icy. I agree with you. The government is running the country down on purpose. And when you say government, you don't mean today's government, Anthony Albanese's Labor government. You mean government in this country, federal government in this country, and the states. They're hollowing out the bush. That is the objective behind the Water Act of 2007 that John Howard and Malcolm Turnbull introduced. Behind the climate claims, behind the hollowing out of transport and the neglect of infrastructure, especially water infrastructure. I mean, the Water Act, John Howard's Water Act of 2007, has as one of its aims, stated in 4 or 5 times in the Act, that its aim is to ensure compliance with our international commitments. What the hell is that doing in our legislation for this country? What they've done is they've transferred property rights, water rights from family farms, small farms, to global corporations that are foreign owned for control of food production. That they are deliberately running down the country, the regions, for that purpose, deliberately on purpose. Hello from Ireland. We are experiencing some of the same issues as you Aussies. Thank you, Ray, and thank you for watching. Yes, we know that they've shut down. They're trying to kill cows over there to stop your dairy production. The Netherlands farmers are now revolting against the Netherlands government. So we see this in New Zealand, we see this in Australia, we see it in Canada, we see it in the United States, and it's not just the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and the globalists that way. It's also organisations like the World Wildlife Fund, WWF. Do not give money to them. They are bastards. They're shutting down beef in America and Australia. They're shutting down coal, and they're just making it impossible for us to have a productive capacity. But governments are neglecting the productive capacity. It's government's job to make sure the infrastructure is there, and then for business to be able to invest in their own businesses and employ people using that infrastructure. Les Campbell, any plans to reject central bank digital currencies and digital identities? Yes, mate. We're the ones who raised the issue about the digital identity bill that Scott Morrison's government wanted to introduce, and introduced as a working document, not for voting at the time. And we thought that the federal government under Morrison would not introduce it as something to be voted on as a law before the election, but it would happen after Labor got into power, and they're now talking about it again. So these two parties are working together, and they create a lie that says they're not working together at times. For example, the misinformation and disinformation bill was introduced by the Morrison government into Parliament, but they didn't get around to that before the last election. And sure enough, as we forecast, the Labor Party is now about to introduce it. It's a censorship bill, and what do we see? We see the Liberal Party saying that they're opposing the Labor Party's bill. It's a crock, because what they did was they introduced it into the Parliament. So yes, Les, we have said that we will reject digital identities completely. It's another instrument for control. That's all it is. Going across the Story Bridge, city's on the left. We've got to go to Newfound to drop off some gear, and then I've got to be on TNT radio in a very short time, so I'm going to have to say goodbye pretty soon. Any last questions? Yes, Nix, the disinformation bill is incredibly sinister. It's there to control. What they want to do is information to control social media. The Department of Home Affairs, which is supposed to be looking after our security, was the one enabling social media to censor people. The Department of Health censored people directly, as well as through the Department of Home Affairs. So the people in the department freedom of speech is fundamental to freedom in general. So I'm going to say goodbye there. Thank you so much for listening in, and I'll catch you next week.